Hello, I'm Darja Wagner, cellular and molecular biologist. You can look up my website at paleomama, in German paleo-mama.de. As you can see, I'm sitting here in front of the big Congress Center in Milan, Italy, where a large conference, the biggest European one for reproductive medicine and embryology, just finished. So before I leave to the airport, I thought I would summarize my notes for everyone who was not able to attend and is interested what's going on, what are the recent advances in the field. So I know it's also sometimes messy to look in the internet on demand, and I love summarizing things for people and also to keep it tidy and simple in my own mind. A lot has happened this year, so to start at the beginning, at the keynote lecture. The keynote lecture was given by Mauro Gacci this year, so he comes from Uni Florence, and he told us an interesting thing that about 1/4 of men who recovered from COVID demonstrated either oligo or crypto or azo or whatever spermia, so different abnormalities in semen. So they had all signs of genital inflammation, and this was strictly related to the severity of COVID. And this was not the only talk on COVID and fertility. So we had few sessions, I'll come to that again. So then there was a second keynote, and I want to start with keynotes because keynotes always tell where the field is heading, so what's going to be happening in the time to come. So the second keynote was coming from Eshre Kolibianakis. I hope I pronounced that right. He comes from Thessaloniki, and he gave us a great lecture about individualizing treatments, which is of course something that everybody's thinking of, everybody's wishing, but he reminded us nicely how little we know about many things, how error prone our judgment is, how prone we all are to convictions. He showed this wonderful hierarchy, like when you go from expert opinion towards case reports and case controlled reports, and then studies, and then cohort studies, and then randomized controlled trials, and then to systematic reviews. So like this nice scaling of the truth content, to put it in that way, and how we all tend to mix it all up sometimes. Then I would like to come to two topics that dominated this year's largest European conference on reproductive medicine and embryology. So the topic number one was artificial intelligence, and the topic number two was again individualizing treatments, and it was heavily dominated by the companies, which also sort of gives you a strange feeling sometimes if you are a research scientist. So to the first one, there was a surprising willingness, I'd say, on the side of Eshre organizing committee to put forward artificial intelligence topics in a big way, like really big time. So we had many sessions, almost too many sessions on artificial intelligence, because it's something very new. So you would say there is not much known, and there is not much known, but surprisingly there were talks over talks over talks, and we did hear some cons. We did hear, let me try to find this in my notes. Yeah, so there were really nice speakers confirming the general opinion, I would say, because you could really feel it in the audience that doctors and embryologists were not like totally delighted to hear that machines could ever be working better than them? And there was some skepticism in the audience. So there were a few speakers sort of telling from all our hearts things like, yeah, you know, we can collect a lot of data, but we need people who are able to understand these data, because algorithms can only be as good as the data we feed into them. So then we also heard how like deep learning associates with traits that are beyond our control, and we still need to understand these traits before we ever apply any sort of deep learning to oocytes or sperm. Well, we heard fears about data poisoning in case of cyber attacks. Then we heard, we generally heard thoughts on how biology of life is unpredictable, as we all know, and life is just not like an algorithm. And plus that sometimes even embryos with not such a great morphology, or even with directly bad diagnosis and prognosis, they made it to implantation, and they made it to healthy and great babies and people. So there was a lot of skepticism to feel, to sense on the side of audience. Nevertheless, there were just many talks on artificial intelligence and how awesome it will be, and let's see how all that starts. Well, okay, we got to hear some rather correct things. Like, we were reminded on how embryo diagnostic field moved from scanning for monogenetic diseases and very rare disorders, and then how it progressed towards testing for aneuploidy, of course, which is a very helpful thing. It's probably the biggest advancement in the field for women over 35. And then we heard how embryo testing would like to move in the direction of genomic, which is a tricky thing, because whenever you come to any sort of omic, it becomes tricky. Either it's genomic, or is it proteomic, or transcriptomic, or metabolomic. Any omic means a lot of data, and someone will need to know how to understand the data and what to do about them finally. So it's a gray field, but now this gray field is sort of supposed to expand into even deeper learning and data algorithms and artificial intelligent things. So then we also heard from one speaker. Let me see if I can find his talk. Oh yeah, how embryologists tend to be biased. Like, if you show them basically a plate with many embryos, they tend to select the first best one for the transfer. So, and if you would put this in a machine with a great algorithm, then this machine would maybe not decide for a well number 13 or 14 or whatever, but maybe would go up and say this best embryo in a well 96 is 5% better maybe as the one sold by embryologists. After that talk of Daniel Seidman telling us how embryologists tend to select the first best embryo, we also heard some pros from Dean Morbeck from New Zealand and several other people. So basically, pro artificial intelligence people argued that there is this big black box in reproduction, right? So basically, from the moment of fertilization to the moment of implantation, we know pretty much nothing about what's going on, or at least this is what's argued about medical health professionals. Actually, biologists would tell you, well, in exactly this black box, there is a nature operating, there is a evolution operating, there is a God operating, whatever, see it whichever way you like, but this tiny window between fertilization and implantation is time when embryos have to convince uterus to accept them and to feed them, and they have to show their immunological competence. And there is a huge amount of selection taking place, and actually naturally many embryos don't survive this period. But in the eyes of many health professionals, this is a black box which basically needs to be eliminated. And it is said like, oh, is it okay to have a black box when we have all the technical abilities to fill in? So the black box should in the future be filled in by artificial intelligence. Nobody knows like in which way. So there is a huge space open for all kinds of manipulation, not even to mention the fact that basically in the future the one who owns algorithms, the one who can manipulate finally algorithms, would be the one deciding on which eggs and sperm get to reproduce and make babies or not. Let's see if I can find another thing. Yeah, there is in this talk it was also pro artificial intelligence, but I must say I found that I liked it. You know, there are some things about, you know, how algorithms could indeed help and so on. There are definitely some things that could be useful. So we will obviously have to be extremely careful about all this. So yeah, there is a company called Future Fertility, and so fertility, there was a seminar that they gave with several speakers and a nice discussion afterwards, and it was quite interactive. So they asked everybody in the audience entire time like on our opinion and how we grade different things, how we feel about different things. So it was really nice. Let me give you the summary. So this one actually showed that there could be some usefulness in algorithms grading oocytes. So not so much helping embryologists, because embryologists in general like know very, very, very good what they're doing, and I feel that no machine will ever come even close to a very, you know, to an eye of a very experienced embryologist. And to this, like, why would you need a machine to grade an embryo? You know, if you want to know which embryo will develop to a day 5 or 6, you know, to a nice blastocyte, you just wait, you know, and see and test. But I do see some potential usefulness in algorithms testing and grading eggs, because for women freezing their eggs, they will want to know with how many eggs in the future they really can count. So we do need something like a good testing system, reliable algorithms to grade oocytes. And this will be very, very, very tricky thing to do, because on a microscope there is no way you can tell which egg has a potential, has this robustness to give an embryo and a baby or not. So sometimes you can tell like major morphologic differences. You know, you can see if there are some, you know, granulations, like whatever in there, you know, if the egg is suffering and maybe trying to discard some organelle, so you can tell this. But like when looking at two perfect eggs, you just can't know which one will be able to get fertilized and give a new life. So if in the future, if there would be possible, and there is, as said, a company working on this, comparing over thousands of images and trying to find very subtle differences. And if this ever works, I can imagine it will be a huge help in creating oocytes for women who are freezing them and who want to know whether they need another stimulation cycle to freeze even more, and so on. Then we had several beautiful sessions, heavily dominated and actually booked by huge companies. Please understand that I will not mention companies' names, because I prefer to tell you the truth, or I prefer to tell you what's my perspective. I think it's generally very tricky in this field that so much important data, that the most important cells and stem cells of human body are kept and are possessed basically by the companies. So this is something that the field will have to will still have to understand and cope with. But let's say for now this is simply the case, and there is not much that can be done about it. So it feels strange, like when you come as a biologist to this sort of conference, and you know, in the academic world you have a much more generally thinking and discussing and being careful and repeating data. But then when you come to the medical conference, where people work with stem cells that are even more important than the ones that biologists have in research labs, and then you enter the world where there are hardly any controls, where there is not much transparency, and data need to be protected by companies' interests. And plus that everything gets paid by patients themselves. Like this whole field is a huge experiment we are running. Okay, so on the major company symposia that was given by a large company, let me tell you, this company is already now for the field of reproductive medicine and embryology what Pfizer is for the field of vaccines. So it's huge, and that was also reflected in the talks they gave. Like it felt magical, you know, like how the walls were sort of spinning, you know, with eggs and embryos and cells, and there was a lot of, you know, this sort of film, you know, feeling. And we got informed basically how the field will progress. So the idea is that in the future there should be less dropping out, which is good, of course, for the doctors and also good for the companies. So they identified very well points where couples who are in IVF cycles, where they tend to drop out for any reasons, for relationship reasons, financial reasons, emotional reasons. So these points were identified, and now there is a lot of work and effort put to smoothen all this and to make people actually feel better about the whole process. So like their well-being should be improved, to put it this way. And so that they shouldn't be dropping out. Basically, they just need to sign credits, bring all the finances together, enter the clinic, and in the future there should be much more of this one and done approach. So basically that couples enter and they remain in the cycles one after the other until they have a baby. And cycles should even be sort of fused, so not even like back-to-back cycles one after the other, but there was a lot of talking about dual stimulation, like also stimulating with fertility drugs, like also in the luteal in the second half of the cycle, so that you extract basically as many follicles as possible, that this follicle yield is maximized so that couples come to their babies as quickly as possible and also in as enjoyable as possible. One of the company speakers tried to reassure everybody in the audience by saying all these stimulations are not changing the oocyte fate. I'm sure research biologists would have a ton of questions related to this, but I'm just telling you the way it is presented. So all that is not changing the oocyte fate, and actually there was a very nice talk showing some basic science about how priming and how combining LH with classical FSH stimulation actually does improve oocyte yields and does lead to a better follicle recruitment and finally to better clinical pregnancy rates. And this talk I actually liked a lot, was based on data from one huge national registry. Was done in a very solid, very nice way. Of course, that also raises questions in one's mind, like how like, is it right, to have many data collected in national registers and finally paid by taxpayers' money and collected in our all interest, right? And then to have it used for companies, research and results and profits, basically. Okay, I have to rush to the airport, but let me just tell you a few things. What happened on the patient side, right? There was a nice patient advocating session. So that was really nice to hear patient telling things and taking their perspective on everything what was going on. So there were patients crying at the microphone, so it was really touching. And in the audience we had people saying like, oh, this should have been a keynote lecture, like this is something that everyone should listen to. We had presentations of people who succeeded with IVFs. We had a presentation of one medical doctor. She and her husband finally did not succeed, but went through an amazing journey through several countries. So this was really pretty awesome to hear. And then, well, just to summarize it quickly for you, so we heard things like in the clinic, doctors should sometimes protect patients from each other. Yeah, that was a sort of strange thing to hear. But this woman, a patient, was telling us a lot how there is a tremendous amount of envy sometimes in the clinic after patients having their eggs retrieved, and this sort of enviness, like, oh, I had just 2 eggs and this woman had 9 and I hate her, and like apparently there are just incredible feelings sometimes coming up. And well, patients were telling like how they feel hurt about sometimes doctors don't introducing themselves and being too much in a hurry and all things you know about. And they were showing pictures of blastocytes, of embryos that didn't implant, and saying how they feel these embryos are their babies. So apparently they are just embryos for health care professionals, but real people feel their babies sort of fragmenting away. And there seems to be a huge demand for psychological help and counseling that should definitely be actually present in every clinic. We heard many other things from patients, but as maybe the last key points, they said they would love in the future to be more treated like human beings and to be more involved in decision making and to feel more like individuals. So they said all this and meant like this is what they would like to achieve with their doctors. And I was thinking like, oh, what would they say if they knew what was going on in the hall just on the next side, all these stories about artificial intelligence and so on. So to me it seems that neither doctors nor patients will like things in reproductive medicine becoming any less human and any less individual. All right, and now really to close, because I have to catch my plane, I will just take a few pics from my note, my personal favorites. I apologize to everyone who is not mentioned. There were just too many sessions and it was really too awesome, and there was so many great information. So I will pick those that are related to my research and my interest, and that is oocyte and oocyte quality. So we heard a great lifestyle session, how there are preconception programs needed to help women better prepare their bodies, their oocytes, their sperm on treatments, on fertility treatments. And when this works, then many women also get pregnant in natural way. And don't need doctors, which is pretty awesome. So we had some nice talks on this and how BMI plays a big role and how it's important to have body mass index within the right range. And there was a very interesting thing which I noticed for many years, and I don't hear much discussion about it, and now it was mentioned in one talk, and it was about how many infertility patients, how they tend to have disturbed image of their own body, and they don't seem to notice that they are extremely skinny or basically anorexic, or that they have way too many pounds extra that are messing with their hormones and their egg and of course embryo quality. So yeah, there's been a great session on oocyte assessment, so judging oocyte quality, hosted by Verena Nordhoff as one of the chairs. There was several beautiful talks, so let me just do some pics. Giovanna D'Amelio was reporting on mitochondrial biogenetics and measuring, and reminded everybody of the importance of fine mitochondrial regulation during oogenesis. And so this field is very much coming up. We had an interesting talk about another non-invasive artificial intelligence analysis for oocyte quality. So a speaker came from Canada, and reported on a beautiful trial in which actually two pretty big clinic chains participated. It's a trial fertility and care group from the UK. So you can tell there is a huge amount of interest in the clinics for this sort of help on judging oocyte quality. And they have this algorithm. It's with this magenta so-called score. There is a lot of work going there, so we will hear about many more names and algorithms, but they seem to have very reasonable results, and so hopefully we will not have to wait for this sort of help very long. We also had some interesting sobering insights, I would say, from the lab. There seemed to be a huge impact of things like cellular media and all sorts of laboratory parameters on embryo quality and also on clinical pregnancy rates. So there were things reported about cell media, and it was a bit shocking. So let me just say, we should all stick to the field biggest at the moment, to the biggest and most known media providers to stay safe. Yeah, then we had some talks on central granularity and how it impacts clinical pregnancy rates, on measuring progesterone, all sorts of connections with implantation rates, clinical pregnancy. So I do encourage you to look for the details on demand sessions. But let me tell you this, there were beautiful talks on PRP. So just in a nutshell, what it is, like a few days before the embryo transfer, there is some blood taken from the patient and spinned, and there is plasma and platelet-rich portion taken out. And researchers stress that there absolutely should be no erythrocytes and no granulocytes, neutrophils in it. So basically, there is this portion with platelets-rich plasma, and there are many beautiful growth factors in there, starting with hepatocyte growth factor, IGF, TGF, VEGF, PGF, all kinds of growth factors. And a little bit tricky thing is, I'd say that we don't know in details yet what they are doing. So they are heavily involved in vascularization, tissue remodeling, all processes that are related to implantation, and somehow they do aid to implantation. So it seems to be promising, and there is definitely a need to do much more work there. And then we had many beautiful, interesting research reports that were not like entire sessions, but bring incredible insights in what's really going on in the practice. And I personally found interesting like what Dorrit Christina Kisslinger from Netherlands reported, and that were results from a multi-center, like really huge study where researchers finally saw no differences in time lapse versus routine embryo handling. And this was the largest such study to date. So this was really interesting, and she said that we should be careful with introducing new exciting technologies that finally translate as a great costs to patients and are not necessarily proven to bring significant benefits. But it's probably not the last word being said there. Okay. We had many beautiful poster discussions, journal club, basic science. I think I would like to mention a poster on childhood exposure to high-fat diet changes small RNA profile and many things, many parameters in sperm health up to 2 subsequent generations. And the study was done in mice, but it's hard to imagine that that this would not be in a way comparable in humans. Then we had a beautiful session on Man Up initiative. I will have an extra video on this, so I will share it and encourage that you please hear something about this. Just very quickly, you should know that in Western societies there is let's say I'll take example of Germany. There is maybe $10 per capita, like per person per year, invested in some sort of a basic research, and just about 3 cents out of this goes into research related to male fertility. And this is compared across a range of countries, and these researchers would like to see this changed. They would like to see much more research about male fertility, how can be improved by natural means, and many other things. So I said I have an extra video on this. So let me close this to not miss my plane. As a last point, there were many talks about law and legislation and everything was going on there. As you know, the field of reproductive medicine is still highly unregulated in many even European countries, but certainly many countries around the world. And there are efforts to change this, which is good, but there is also a lot of advocating from small groups in this field, which can be tricky. In a session on this, we heard from Anita Fensham from Poland, for example, about how there is initiative to create atlases, like simplify things like this, then to share such atlases in European Parliament to make politicians better understand what patients would like and what needs to be changed. And as said, this is a much needed initiative, that's for sure. But there is also a lot of lobbying being done here, and I feel, and I'm certainly not the only one, that the biggest challenge maybe right now with legislation in the field of reproductive medicine is setting the limits, understanding where the limits are and how these limits should not be crossed. Right now we seem to be at the beginning. Right now there seem to be there is not even simple understanding on what a patient means. Like what constitutes a patient. Like if a woman has a PCOS and wants to get pregnant, she's definitely a patient who needs help. But if a woman is perfectly healthy and she only missed her fertility window, so she's basically, you know, in advanced reproductive age, is this still a patient? Well, probably, because she definitely needs the help of a medical doctor. But if this goes even beyond, and if you have all sorts of couples coming for all sorts of lifestyle reasons and wishing to have clinics make babies for them, or even going that far to travel to other countries and maybe even buy children and so on and so on. I mean, this is probably clearly crossing the line. So there needs to be a lot of work done on defining what does it mean a patient, what does it mean a treatment, what needs to be allowed, what maybe needs an international moratorium to be put on before these sort of atlases get incorporated in European laws. So there were many more interesting things, but I really need to rush to the airport. I would like to use this opportunity to thank to the organizers for inviting me. I had a beautiful time just like the last time, and look forward to the next meeting in Copenhagen next year. So I send you many greetings from Milano, and hope to see you on one of the conferences. All the best!